I know this is difficult to talk about, but tell me about the day that Andrew died by suicide. He'd only talked about it once before.
Yeah, we were absolutely shocked and stunned. And so were all the professionals, the team of doctors that was helping him on his journey. Like, we were all shocked and stunned. We had stepped away from him just for a little bit to work on a plan for his mental health. You know, he had a really bad day in the office the day before that. And so we knew, like, maybe it's not time for him to go back to work. Maybe he's not healthy. Maybe we need to take some next steps for his healing. And so while we were on the phone, while we were making arrangements for Sunday, he attempted suicide, and we were completely shocked. It was very traumatizing. He was rushed to the hospital. The doctors ran a bunch of tests, and there was nothing that they could do. And the following day, he died and went to be with Jesus. And it's still shocking. You know, that same pain that I felt that very first day, that same confusing pain, pit in my stomach, elephant on my chest, like that same shock and confusion, I still carry that with me today. Like, that doesn't go away. And that's what I've learned about pain. Like, I will carry the pain of Andrew's death with me for the rest of my life. And hopefully the grief that I'm carrying will grow smaller. And so it will tap that pain button less often, but that pain remains unchanging. It's still just as shocking, just as confusing, and just as sickening and traumatizing as it was that first day.
You know, you were a 29-year-old mom with 3 young boys. How are you negotiating those really painful questions in the days following?
I would say that the events just circled in my mind. My mind tried to save him. And because I had never walked through this before, my brain had nowhere to store it. And so it would just circulate through my mind all day. And my mind would come up with a million different ways to save him. And I went to therapy. I went to therapy every single week for a year and a half after he passed away. And my therapist told me something that was really helpful, that my brain needed to create a file folder for all of the trauma to go into, and that over time, as I did therapy and as I healed, all of that trauma and that experience would go into that file, and I would be able to pull it out when and if I wanted to. And so the days following, it was very difficult, and you know, breaking the news to 3 little boys who love their dad was very difficult. The most difficult thing I've ever done in my entire life was sitting them down and telling them that their dad died.
I can't even imagine, and I really hope that one of the results of you going public is that people pray for you and your kids as you're trying to negotiate this single parent life. We don't have a lot of time left, so I just want to make sure we hit on this. You know, you talk about 3 lies that we believe, particularly as people of faith, around losing somebody to suicide. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so in my journey, you know, after he passed away, and I'm learning more about suicide, and I'm learning about all these things that I wish I would have done differently. And, you know, one of the myths I'll never forget, it was in the hospital room while he lay dying on the hospital bed. And I leaned over the hospital bed and I asked my mom, my mother-in-law, will he go to heaven? And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions of suicide, that suicide is this unforgivable sin. And that what I've learned through that is that our salvation doesn't hinge on the way that we die. Our salvation hinges on our relationship with Jesus. And my mother-in-law reassured me of that in the hospital room in that moment when I was wondering where he would go after he passed away. And so that's a big myth that I've been trying to change. Another myth is that when someone dies by suicide, that the suicide is selfish. You know, a big response that I got from people was, how could he do this to his family? And the way that I've reconciled that in my mind is that it wasn't him. You know, he was overcome with pain. His brain was sick. He had a real physical illness happening in his body, and it wasn't him. He wasn't able to access that rational part of his brain. And that's why instead of saying committed suicide, I use the phrase died by suicide. And that clearly sends the message that the death was the result of an underlying physical condition, not a decision. And I think when we change our words and develop new language surrounding mental health and suicide, it really helps us to grow empathy and compassion for the person who died. It wasn't Andrew's fault. It wasn't my fault. It was nobody's fault, and nobody is to blame for his death. It's a tragedy, and nobody is to blame.
If there is somebody watching us right now, Kayla, who's like, I can't get away from these thoughts of suicide. And I just feel like the people in my life would be better off not having to go through the torment of what I'm experiencing, or I myself would be better off. What would you say to them?
I would say I am so deeply sorry for your unbearable pain. Like, I have experienced suicidal thoughts as well, walking through these last few years after losing my husband. And I know that the pain is real and the pain is overwhelming and the pain is so tangible. And so I am so deeply sorry for your pain. And I would encourage you to please keep finding a way to live with the pain. What I've learned these last few years is that living with the pain is possible. It's possible to have this big, overwhelming pain that you would wish would just go away, but to find a way to live with it. So keep asking God to teach you how to live with the pain. Reach out for help. Tell close friends. If you're struggling with suicidal thoughts and you haven't told anybody, today is the day to tell somebody. Pick up the phone and call a close friend. Pick up the phone and call a therapist. If you don't have a therapist, go on Psychology Today and put in your zip code and your insurance information and find a therapist near you. We love you. We want you to stay, and we need you. Tomorrow needs you. Like, please stay here with us. Keep being brave. Keep finding a way to live with the pain.